Hi, everyone. Okay, today we're going to talk about rods and different kind of rods and when you're buying them and what's a good rod, what's a bad rod, just a little bit of that. Um, uh, First of all, there's lots of background noise. I hope the sound comes out pretty good, but I think it will. They're redoing my street. Um, so when I go out and I'm teaching intermediates, um, there's always a question of what's a good rod, what's a bad rod, and I have people switch around their rods a lot just so that they know what's going on. And let's first of all talk about what a rod does, and then some of the things you should look at when you're looking at a rod. Probably the least thing you can do is when you go to a store, you pick up the rod and you kind of wiggle it around. You go, oh, that feels like a good rod. Well, some rods are very light and some are heavier and some are more balanced and stuff, but that's another topic. The main point of your rod is as you're dragging the line through the air, the rod bends. And then when you stop, the rod unloads its energy and shoots the line forward. You know, so really most of the time when you're casting, you're not casting, the rod is casting. And what you're doing is pulling the line through the air. You never want to think about you're shooting the line out. You're not shooting the line, the rod is shooting the line. Okay? So as you cast, your rod bends back, you build up that potential energy, and then as soon as you stop, the rod springs forward and throws the line forward. Okay? That's what your line does. That's what your rod does. And it tries to do that in the thinnest possible way with as much force as possible. And it's transferring that energy from your hand to that abrupt stop. And that's when the line shoots out. Okay. So now you pick up different people's rods and they feel different. And you go, well, what's going on with that? The rod must be better, must be worse. And, marketing as what it is what it is. So the marketers have kind of come up with names for things, which I guess are, as good as any. And so let's take a look at these different, this is my high-tech thing here. There's basically three kinds of rods. We have what's called a slow rod, which means that the bend of the rod happens all the way from where the handle meets, all the way in a nice continuous curve all the way. Now there's things called parabolic curves, and there's 100 different ways that we can look at the curve. But basically the whole rod flexes. Fiberglass rods are really, really good at this. And we call them slow rods because you have to cast kind of slowly, but I'll get back into that. There's what's called, and then there's a fast action rod, okay? And a fast action rod is basically, the rod itself is pretty stiff, but just the tip bends. It's hard to notice this, but if you look at a bunch of rods, you'll be able to see this. There's some functions for that too. And then obviously there's always a mid-flex, which means part of the rod is stiff, but sort of the middle section and the tip section both bends, okay? Now, these fast action rods were really touted for a while, and they're very, very good for accuracy, for fighting heavy fish, because this is good and stiff here. Not quite the most delicate presentations, whereas these are more like bamboo rods over here, the slow ones, are much more gentle presentation, but you can't like hurl, one of these big flies very far with one of these. Some people could, but in general, not. So, a new person typically will go to the store and they'll, look or they'll look in the magazines and they'll see, ooh, these are the ones that all the competition people, these are typically the most expensive ones. But really, in effect, the slower the rod, the more forgiving it is. A lot of beginner rods, like I have a whole set of these LL Bean rods that I use for teaching, are slow rods, but it allows a new person, they can make some mistakes and they flex a little bit more. So Uh, the big thing, the big thing with a good caster is this movement, and it's almost imperceptible. You have to have an incredibly smooth acceleration to this point, and then an amazing, just like dead stop, as if you're hitting a wall. It's very hard to. It takes time to learn that, and that's what's going to make you like a really good caster. And as you do it long enough, you develop the muscles to be able to accelerate and stop real fast. Well, the medium rod allows you to be a little slower on that and a little sloppier on the stop. The fast rods are much more not forgiving, okay? So they're going to, you really need to know what you're doing. So I always suggest people try rods and try them with different lines too. If you've got a friend that has multiple lines of the same weight, and you go to a store and try some rods, or play around with each other's rods, and switch lines too, because the lines will have an effect. These kind of rods work much better with what's called bass taper, or very, very forward weighted lines. These typically work with like more smoother, where the weight of the line is spread out a little bit more. And in fact, a lot of times now what's happening is these are getting so stiff that the line companies, instead of being a 5-weight line, it's a 5.5 or even 6-weight line that they're putting on them. They call them 5 weights. 5 weights for, high fast action rods, which are really a 6-weight line. So there's a lot of, mucking around that's going on there. But it's best to kind of find somewhere. Now, is the middle one the best one? No, not necessarily. This may be a good place to start, but if you're fishing like a lot of like brook trout and smaller stuff, or dry flies, gentle kind of fishing, this may be the way to go. If you're fishing these big bugs, big bass bugs and game changers and stuff, this may be the way to go. So a lot of it has to do with what you're going to end up casting. So there's 3 things: what you're casting, actually 4. What you're casting, what kind of fish you're catching, your casting abilities, and the line. So there's 4 variables there, okay, which makes it really tough to get just the right one. So after a few years and spending a gazillion dollars, okay, by having different rods and different reels, and the reels don't make any difference, having different rods and different lines and switching them in and out, then you'll find that combination and you'll go, oh, this is exactly, perfect for my cast, for the kind of fishing I do, for, the kind of fish I catch, for the kind of flies I use, okay? So I can't recommend anything in particular. I have a certain rod and line combination that I absolutely love for fishing on the Huron. It's like it's my dream connection, and but it's not necessarily going to be yours if you're fishing, the South Branch of the Asable or something. So they're all going to be different, but it all has to do with this physics. It's all about physics. So you're pulling the line through, the rod is bending, and then you stop, and that flicks. So whether the bend is just in this part, from here to here, or all the way to the end of your rod, is going to determine sort of the speed of the rod. All right, I hope that maybe explains that a little bit better. None is better than the other. It's all a matter of what you're going to do with it. Okay? So I hope there wasn't too much beeping and stuff going on. It's pretty crazy. We'll see you next time.